Have you ever had someone say, "You've changed," and they didn't mean it as a compliment? I have. It's funny because if I'm being honest, I hope I have changed. I hope I'm not the same guy I was 20 years ago. I hope I'm not even the same guy I was 5 years ago. If I'm paying attention to life, if I'm learning, if I'm healing, well, why wouldn't I change? But somewhere along the way, "you've changed" became this accusation, almost like someone is saying, "Hey, I like the old version better." And that can mesh with your head. Because if you're anything like me, the first instinct is to get defensive and then to wonder, wait, did I do something wrong? I think a lot of us do that. We put up the walls, we defend our positions, and then we start auditing ourselves. Maybe I was too blunt. Maybe I should have handled that conversation differently. Maybe I really am becoming selfish. And here's what I've started realizing. Sometimes they're absolutely right. You have changed. Why is it that not everyone wants you to heal?
Welcome to Aligned AF, real talk for evolving souls with Yahweh Kent. Join Yahweh for honest conversations on spiritual growth, the messiness of life, and how to move through it all at a higher frequency. So grab a cup of tea and let's sail in. This is Aligned AF, and here's Yahweh.
Welcome back to Aligned AF, real talk for the evolving soul. I am Yahweh. I want to thank you for tuning in today, and naturally, I want to encourage you to not only like and subscribe, but to share. Share this episode with someone who may benefit from the words shared here, and do the same thing with any other episode that you've checked out. It's important that we support each other in any ways we can. And sometimes it's as simple as telling a friend or your social media group about a podcast episode that really resonated with you. So please accept my gratitude in advance for doing just that. So let's dig in. Today's episode is Not Everyone Wants You to Heal. Why People Pull Away When You Finally Find Yourself. And the real reason that they pull away? Well, it's because they miss you, or they miss a version of you. But which version of you are they missing? Because not every version of you deserves to be resurrected. Maybe they're missing the version of you that never said no. Maybe they're missing the version that always picked up the phone, even when you were exhausted. Maybe they're missing the version that apologized just to keep the peace, even when you weren't the one who should have been apologizing. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying these people are bad people. This isn't one of those episodes where we decide everyone from our past is toxic. Life is usually a little more complicated than that. Sometimes people simply get used to a certain version of us. Imagine your favorite coffee shop suddenly rearranges the furniture. Same coffee, same people, same place, but you walk in and instinctively head for your usual chair, and it's gone. You notice immediately, not because the coffee shop did anything wrong, but because your routine changed. Relationships work a lot like that. People get comfortable, not just with who we are, but how we fit into their lives. And when we start healing, we're the ones moving the furniture. Suddenly, the person who always needed us to fix every problem has to figure some things out on their own. The friend who always expected us to say yes hears us say, "You know what? I can't this weekend." And they're surprised, not because you're a different person, but because the pattern changed. And patterns are comfortable, even unhealthy ones. I've caught myself doing this from the other side too. I remember running into someone I hadn't seen in years, and in my mind, they were still the same person I'd always known. Same personality, same sense of humor, same opinions. But within 5 minutes of talking to them, I realized, oh, they're different now. And for a split second, it felt odd. Not bad, just unfamiliar. And then it hit me. What right did I have to expect them to stay exactly the same while life kept happening to them? Think about everything that's happened in your life over the last 5 years. The losses, the victories, the moments that brought you to your knees, the conversations that changed you, the books that shifted your thinking, the people who came into your life, the people who left. Wouldn't it actually be strange if none of that changed you? I hope you're enjoying today's episode. Sometimes we spend so much time talking about healing that we forget there's support available while we're doing the work. If something from today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to walk alongside you for a while. Through truth coaching, we gently uncover the stories and beliefs that may be keeping you stuck so you can reconnect with the wisdom that's already within you. I also offer distance Reiki and Metatron Cube installations for those who feel called to experience healing from a more energetic perspective. You don't have to have everything figured out before reaching out. You don't have to be in crisis. Sometimes all you need is a conversation with someone who can help you see what you've been unable to see on your own. If you'd like to learn more, reach out to me at alignedafpodcast@gmail.com. Now, let's get back to today's conversation. We celebrate growth until growth changes our relationships. Then suddenly we get nervous. Then here's where I think a lot of us make mistakes. We assume that every relationship is built on love, but I don't think that's entirely true. I think relationships are built on expectations. Now, don't throw your phone at me just yet, okay? Just hear me out. Every relationship has unwritten rules. You don't even realize they're there. One friend always calls first. One sibling always keeps the peace. One spouse handles the finances. One coworker always volunteers. One family member hosts every holiday. These patterns become invisible because they've existed for so long. It's like driving the same route to work every day. You don't think about the turns anymore. Your body just knows where to go. Relationships are exactly like that. We stop responding to who the person is, and we start responding to who we've learned them to be. That's why healing can be so disruptive, because healing says, I'm taking a different road. Sometimes the people riding with you don't even notice at first. Then all of a sudden they look up and go, wait, where are we going? And maybe the answer is, I honestly don't know. I just know I can't keep driving in circles. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about healing is that it turns you into someone new. I don't think it does. I think healing removes the things that were never really you. Imagine a sculpture carved from marble. Now, Michelangelo supposedly said that the statue was already inside the stone. His job wasn't to create it. His job was to remove everything that wasn't David. Now, I love that idea because maybe healing isn't adding anything. Maybe it's subtracting. Maybe you're not becoming more. Maybe you're becoming less. Less afraid, less reactive, less desperate for approval, less willing to betray yourself just to keep everyone comfortable. And so this is where it gets interesting, because when you stop betraying yourself, someone else loses the version of you that betrayed yourself for them. That's not an easy sentence to hear. I had to sit with that one for a while because I realized there were times in my life when I confused being loving with being endlessly available. And those aren't the same thing. Love says, I care about you. People pleasing says, I'll abandon myself so you don't have to be uncomfortable. That's a huge difference. And if you're laughing right now because that one hit home, well, welcome to the club. I think they gave me a lifetime membership. No monthly dues, just a lot of unnecessary guilt. But seriously, have you ever noticed how uncomfortable it feels the first time you say no? Somebody asks you to do something. You genuinely don't have the energy, and you politely decline. And then you spend the next 3 hours replaying the conversation in your head. Maybe I sounded rude. Should I text them? Maybe I should explain. It's amazing. We can say no and then immediately try to apologize our way back into yes. Why? Because we've been conditioned to believe that disappointing someone means we've done something wrong. I don't think that's true anymore. I think disappointment is sometimes just evidence that a pattern has changed. Not a relationship, a pattern. Here's something I've been sitting with lately. Sometimes when people say, you've changed, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to relate to you anymore. One of those sounds like an accusation. The other sounds almost sad. And I think that's important because this episode isn't about making anyone the bad guy. I know that's kind of popular these days. Everybody's a narcissist. Everybody's toxic. Everybody needs to be cut out of your life. Now, are there genuinely toxic people? Absolutely. There are people who manipulate, people who control, people who don't celebrate your growth because it threatens the control they've had over you. Those people exist. But I don't think that's most people. I think most people are just human. They're trying to make sense of a relationship that suddenly feels unfamiliar. So imagine you've been playing doubles tennis with the same partner for 20 years. You know exactly where they're going to move. You know who's covering which side. You don't even have to think about it anymore. And then one day your partner changes their game. Not because they're trying to mess you up. They've just become a better player. Now, at first, you actually lose more points. Not because either one of you got worse, but because you're learning a new rhythm. Relationships are no different. Sometimes people aren't resisting your healing. They're struggling to learn the new dance. And that doesn't mean stop dancing. It just means you can have compassion while they're figuring out the steps. And I think compassion has become one of the most misunderstood words in spirituality. Compassion doesn't mean agreement. Compassion doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. And compassion doesn't mean saying yes when every cell in your body is screaming no. Compassion simply means, I understand why this is hard for you, without making it my responsibility to fix. That's a huge distinction. For years, I thought compassion meant carrying everyone's emotional backpack. I walk around like a spiritual Sherpa. I've got your stuff and your stuff. Oh, and you have childhood trauma? Throw that in here too. Pretty soon I'm bent over wondering why I'm exhausted. Well, maybe because I was carrying luggage that didn't belong to me. And maybe you've done that too. Maybe you've mistaken emotional responsibility for emotional love. They're not the same thing. And here's another thing I've noticed. Healing has a strange way of exposing invisible contracts. You know the kind. Nobody ever says them out loud. They're never written down, but somehow they're there. I'll always be the strong one. I'll always be the listener. I'll always rescue everybody. I'll never disagree. I'll stay small so nobody feels threatened. You don't sign these contracts. You absorb them, usually without realizing it. Then one day, you wake up. Maybe it was therapy. Maybe it was meditation. Maybe it's losing someone you love. Maybe it's becoming a parent, or maybe it's turning 60 and realizing, I don't have another 60 years to keep pretending. Whatever it is, you begin changing. And then suddenly, those invisible contracts start expiring. That's when people get confused, because they never knew there was a contract. They just knew things used to feel different. And honestly, so did you. So I want to confess something. There have been moments in my own life when someone put up a healthy boundary, and my first reaction was not admiration. It was disappointment. Not because I wanted to control them, but because their boundary inconvenienced me. I had to catch myself. I had to ask, wait, am I upset because they're wrong, or because their growth requires me to grow too? Wow, that is not a fun question, but it's an honest one. Sometimes someone else's healing shines a flashlight into the places we've been avoiding. You ever notice that? Have you ever met someone who's just peaceful? Not fake peaceful, not Instagram peaceful, real peaceful. They don't have to prove anything. They don't argue over every opinion. They don't need the last word. They're just settled. And at first you think, I want whatever they're having. But if you're not careful, another voice creeps in and says, well, they probably don't have the same problems that I have. They've had it a lot easier than I have. They don't understand what I've been through. You see what happened? Instead of becoming inspired, we started protecting our excuses. I think we all do that sometimes. Which brings me to a thought that honestly changed the way I look at relationships. Are you ready? Sometimes your healing isn't threatening people. It's inviting them. The question is whether they're ready for the invitation. So think about that. When you stop gossiping, some people will stop gossiping with you, but others will stop calling. When you stop complaining, some conversations just disappear. When you stop needing constant reassurance, some people don't know what role they play anymore. Not because they don't love you, but because you've changed the language of the relationship. And every relationship does have its own language. Some speak criticism, some speak humor or rescuing or victimhood. Some speak growth. And the best part is, you get to choose which language you're fluent in. But here's the hard part. Not everyone wants to learn a new language. That doesn't make them wrong. It just means maybe they're not able to meet you where you're at today. And that's okay. Maybe loving someone doesn't always mean walking the same road. Sometimes it simply means blessing them as your paths begin to separate. Now, that can be heartbreaking, but it's also incredibly human because not every goodbye has to end with anger. Sometimes it's just two souls thanking each other for the chapter they shared before life asked them to turn the page. Now, can I throw one more wrinkle into this whole conversation? Because we've spent the last half hour talking about the people who might struggle with your healing. But what if the person having the hardest time with your healing is actually you? So think about that. We spend so much time talking about letting go of other people. We almost never talk about letting go of ourselves, or more specifically, the version of ourselves that we've carried around for years. I remember years ago, I heard someone say, your personality is just a collection of habits you've practiced long enough to mistake for who you are. Or more simply, your habits define your identity. That stuck with me because I started asking myself, how much of me is actually me? And how much is survival? Was I really easygoing? Or was I afraid of conflict? Was I really generous? Or was I terrified people wouldn't like me if I said no? Was I really selfless? Or did I simply not know how to ask for what I needed? And those aren't comfortable questions, but they're honest ones. And healing has a funny way of asking honest questions, sometimes before we're ready to answer them. And you know what's strange? We talk about stepping outside our comfort zone, but we rarely talk about grieving our comfort zone. Even if it wasn't healthy, it was familiar. There's something oddly comforting about familiar pain, because at least you know where the potholes are. Healing asks you to drive down a road you've never been on before. No GPS, no guarantee, just this quiet voice inside saying, keep going. And that's scary. You know, if there's anything I've learned over the years, it's that certainty feels safe. Growth almost never does. Growth feels awkward. Growth feels clumsy. It feels like you're learning to write with your opposite hand. Everything feels a little off. And because it feels off, we assume it must be wrong. But maybe it's just new. Think about when you first learned to drive. You were probably gripping the steering wheel like it owed you money. Every mirror, every turn, every stop sign, you were thinking about all of it. But now you can drive home and barely remember the trip. Growth works the same way. At first, boundaries feel unnatural, but eventually, they feel like self-respect. At first, saying no feels selfish, but eventually, it feels honest. And at first, trusting yourself feels risky, but eventually, it feels peaceful and right. The thing that used to terrify you becomes the thing that protects your peace. And here's the beautiful irony in all this. When you stop trying to make everyone comfortable, the people who truly love you actually get to know the real you. Not the edited version, not the filtered version, not the I don't want to disappoint anybody version, the real one. And the truth is, people can't love someone they've never actually met. So if you're constantly performing, they're loving the performance. Not because they're shallow, but because that's all you've ever shown them. Healing isn't becoming someone worthy of love. Healing is becoming someone visible enough to receive it. And that changes things. Because when I realized that, I realized I wasn't actually afraid of rejection. I was afraid of being fully seen. And those are different fears. If someone rejects the mask, who cares? It wasn't really you. But if someone rejects the real you, well, that feels vulnerable. So what do? We put the mask back on. We become agreeable again. We become available again and predictable again. We resurrect the old version because at least we know people liked him. So here's a question I want to leave you with today. If everyone else loves a version of you that requires you to abandon yourself, who exactly is benefiting? Certainly not you. And honestly, not them either. Because relationships built on pretending eventually become prisons for everyone involved. I'd rather have a handful of people who know the real me than a crowd of people applauding a character I've been playing for 30 or 40 or 50 years. Maybe that's what authenticity really is. Not becoming fearless, not becoming perfect, just becoming unwilling to negotiate away pieces of your soul for the temporary comfort of being accepted. And maybe, just maybe, the people who drift away aren't proof that you failed. Maybe they're proof that you've stopped trying to fit into a life that no longer fits you. One way says you're being rejected. The other says you're being redirected. I know which one I'd rather have. So the next time someone looks at you and says, "You've changed," maybe you can smile. Not with arrogance, not with smugness, just with quiet gratitude. Maybe you can say to yourself, "Man, I hope so." Because life is supposed to change us. And healing? Healing isn't about becoming a different person. It's about finally having the courage to become the person you were underneath all the fear. And that's the journey. That's the work. And if it costs you a few relationships along the way, trust that what remains will finally be built on truth. Not obligation, not expectation, not performance, truth. And if you can build a life from that place, I don't think you'll ever miss the old version of yourself. You'll simply thank them. Because they did the best they could until you learned there was another way. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If any of this episode resonated with you, please share it, and please share your comments with me. Leave a review of the show, reach out via email at alignedafpodcast@gmail.com, or simply share your thoughts directly in the comments section. I will respond, I promise. I love feedback, and I really want to make a better show for all of you. And remember, you're getting closer to Aligned AF every single day.